Welcome to CTO Think, a podcast about leadership, product development, and tech decisions between two recovering chief technology officers. Here are your hosts, Don Vandemark and Randy Burgess.
Hey, Don, what's going on?
Hey, outside of everything going on in the country right now, been paying a lot of attention to that, but have a little side project I'm working on, just a little quick quiz app that I'm making slow progress on. And for the two companies, we're just we're plugging along. Construction Specialties looked at the finances for the past 2 months, and even though we're down a significant amount of business, we're still maintaining just about even keel profit wise. Because we cut a bunch. We start. Usually we use some of our employees and some subcontractors, and lately it's been a lot of just using our employees. So that's helped to at least bring the costs more into realm. And then for Aspire EDU, just we work with a couple of different platforms. One of them being Schoology, and Schoology is giving just a little bit of issue right now. And we're trying to work out whether it's on our end or their end. It's a little bit of their APIs doesn't supply as much as we need. So we have to approach getting the information in different ways. So, But yeah, how about you?
When people ask me how I'm doing, all I can say is I'm extremely fortunate. Definitely out in the Kansas City suburbs, very isolated from all sorts of stuff that's been going on. And from a work standpoint, the company I work for, Hierology, did undergo some layoffs.
Sure.
And so that's the first time, I lived through layoffs with my dad, having been through them personally, being laid off, but I've never been a part of a company. Most of the companies I work for have next to no budget as it is. So
right.
It's always been a matter of, hey, we're just shutting this whole idea down, not we're laying off a chunk of the company.
Right.
So that was an experience. But for the most part, managing two teams on two product features, and both teams the people are doing really well. And so just from every standpoint, very fortunate. Things are steady,
right.
But that's kind of, the rest of the world isn't. So that's kind of what we're talking about today.
Right.
I mean, last time I don't even remember the last time we recorded, but we were only talking about COVID-19, the pandemic,
right,
and the side effects to business and what we were worried about. But since that point, we had the death of another African American citizen in the custody of a police force in Minneapolis, George Floyd,
right.
which triggered the protests and some rather minimal looting, I would say, in the whole scheme of things, which then it ignited the anger that has been going on
right.
around how the racism of the racism in the United States, the accountability of police officers, the justice system as it relates to people of color, minorities. But I mean, to me, it's just long overdue. It should have been happening before.
Right.
So in a way, I mean, I want to address the Black Lives Matter movement as just, what it means to myself and you.
Right.
But I think that there's some reflection I've done on our country and what I've always thought it to be and what it actually is. Not to mention I'm not going to have an episode of just Trump sucks, but I can say that my opinion is the leadership displayed out of Washington is not up to the standards, I think, of what anyone should try to model their leadership skills after.
Right. No, you and I had a long text conversation on Monday.
Yeah.
Last week, so about a week ago, because I was about as low as I'd been in a while, pretty much because of the void of leadership, or even that's probably not even strong enough. The presence of really bad leadership. And I want to leave it there because I don't want to make this about me. My issues, my problems aren't a big deal. It's more we all should have been paying more attention. We all should have been doing more previously. But it's here now, and I fully support the efforts of everyone involved to make this a more to actually treat the cause of the problems
Yeah.
and not just treat the symptoms. And I'm here for that. And in discussing this with someone who is of a different political bent than I am, he was more focused on how this was affecting retail stores and our business at Construction Specialties, because he was asking if we were getting a lot of work boarding up stores and repairing stores from looting and things like that. And I told him, I'm like, we haven't seen a lot of that, mainly because we don't deal in a lot of downtown locations. Most of ours is more rural,
Yeah.
or suburban. It's not urban where all your protests are going to happen. But I want to just using that. I want to circle back to something you started with, where you said there was minimal looting. I don't want to call it minimal looting. There was looting, decent amount of looting. There was property damage, and the looting and the rioting is wrong.
Yeah.
I don't want to downplay it, because I want to acknowledge it and treat it as wrong, because what that does is it severely kneecaps any argument that, well, the protesting is causing the rioting, and the numbers just don't show that. The looting and the rioting has almost disappeared to a degree.
I guess what I was trying to say was, if you want to focus on the looting as the biggest thing to be concerned with, it was very minimal compared to the death of George Floyd, the death of the other people at the hands of police.
Sure.
Like, yeah, I'm not promoting looting as something you should ignore. Arrest them. You got video of them. People have the cameras on them as they run out of a store with a TV. But all of these scenarios, all of this protesting has four major actors to it. You've got the protesters, you've got the opportunists, the people that see like, oh, no one's paying attention, I can bust through this window and go take a TV. Then you got the anarchists,
right?
Just it's people dying for an excuse to tear shit up. And then you've got the police, who are in this completely different, like, there's so many sides to their involvement in this, because they are charged with keeping the peace, and they also at times instigate unpeaceful actions. And you have good police and you got bad police.
Right.
You have police that are not trained for these situations. There's there's decades of controversy over how the police enforce safety, and how their actions sometimes instigate a blow up of all those parties. And so when people are like, but looting's bad, like what annoys the shit out of me is when somebody wants to talk about Black Lives Matter and then someone goes, but looting sucks. I'm like, yes, but that's not the BLM movement is never promoting that. Like that's a side effect. That's a symptom that other people, opportunists, are taking advantage of, but it has nothing to do with the actual movement or the reason why any of this started. And
Right.
so I feel like it's a deflection to even discuss it at great length, especially given that it ended it was a very short period of time, and it wasn't over, like it's not something that has continued. It was ended fairly quickly.
Well, and it's also another example of lack of leadership at the top, and here I'm specifically talking about Senator Marco Rubio here in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
Of the two senators we have, you have Marco Rubio, who had a brief stint as a Republican candidate, and you have Senator Rick Scott. Of the two, I don't even bother to try and reach out to Rick Scott because his politics are so on the right side, on the conservative side of things.
Yeah.
That and his words have never meant whatever he said. He's always done opposite that it's not even worth my time. Marco Rubio, I thought, was at some point somebody to work with, but over the last week, his Twitter feed is literally nothing but looting, 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 rioting, 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 looting, looting, rioting, rioting. Antifa, 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 looting, rioting, Antifa. That's all it is.
Yeah.
And I've put in a couple calls to the office, and they have a place where you can just leave a message because trying to actually get through is almost useless. And leaving a message may be also useless, but I try. I'm like, listen, good, yeah, go after them, good. Why don't you address what the cause is actually about here? Because go through his Twitter feed. He doesn't touch it. It's all about looting and rioting and Antifa. So,
I mean, I'm totally cool with any leader saying looting is bad, stop the rioting, stop the violence, but don't just completely use your platform to ignore why everyone's angry,
right.
What has caused the anger, and why these four parties are now on the streets in conflict. Because that's like you can continue to in effect beat down those three parties with the police or the military, which is a whole other what the hell, how did it get that far? But if you completely ignore the underlying cause of the anger, we will go nowhere. It will just get worse.
Right.
And that's where the leadership has been completely devoid. Like the fact that the NFL came out and finally said we handled the peaceful protests wrong was like, okay, like they didn't say Cap's name, but they at least acknowledged that they had been for business reasons ignoring the fact that a peaceful protest meant something that people should pay attention to.
Right.
And then they still get flogged on Twitter, whatever the side effect of a tweet does to you, where the leadership of the nation is like, oh, but wait, you still aren't going to let them do that, right? It's like, come on. Like, at what point do you quit worrying about like I mean, I guess now I'm just spouting political opinions, but The flag represents the freedom, the Constitution. All these people talk about it, what the flag represents, freedom. But yet, when someone uses that freedom in a peaceful manner, they're doing it wrong. Like, that's the whole point.
Right.
And that's where, if we want to circle back to what CTO think and being a leader means in tech and amongst people, it's get your priorities straight on your messaging.
Right.
And it just baffles me that the trivial crap keeps coming up amongst people that say that they're for solving the problems.
Yeah.
Because it falls on deaf ears. Like, there's no way in hell do I believe that the leadership in place in America is actually going to focus on the problems and get anything solved right now.
Right.
I see Minneapolis making a bold gesture on trying to do reform. Maybe it's more than they need to do, but I don't know. It's like my mom asked me, "What do you think about Minneapolis defunding the police?" And I'm just like, I do not know. I know they have to do something. I know that many of us have to do something. I don't
Yeah.
think I don't think you can eliminate law enforcement. I think you need to
No,
change
but
it.
it's interesting. There's a before I dive deep on that, it's interesting because when all this started, you know, over a week ago, my initial focus was back on the whole race equality thing. And this has quickly changed from a race equality discussion to a overuse of police force
Yeah,
discussion, which is fine for me. And I hope it's fine for those who are protesting. Everybody's got to come up with their own decisions as to what's good for them. I'm still firmly on the side of race equality, but this has certainly seemed to have changed to a what do we do about the police discussion, and maybe that's the point. And I did some reading on this because the hashtags abolish the police, defund the police. Those are
yeah,
strong words.
yeah,
But there's something there. And not everybody's going to agree, and that's fine. But there's something there. It's more about the police should be helping the citizenry. That is their job, is to help.
yeah,
So what if we turn all those funds that are used for weapons and defenses and things like that, and just apply that money towards social work? What if we turn the police force into really just a bunch of social workers? Is that helpful? It's a discussion of the police exist because we have homeless on the streets. Well, if you applied more money to housing, that maybe that wouldn't be as big a problem.
yeah,
The police exist to deal with the uneducated people out there who behave in a manner that's not conducive to civilized behavior, I guess. And again, that's okay. So apply the funding towards education. It's a case of, and there was a I don't remember the city. I want to say it was Columbus, maybe,
yeah,
Ohio,
yeah.
where they showed the budget, and the police budget's huge, and every other department's just very, very small.
Well,
Um,
to your point there, you're spending money for symptom management.
right,
You're not spending money on the debt, the societal debt of education and mental health. You send police to handle mental health issues. And what do they have? What do they have with them to handle those? Handcuffs and guns and batons.
right,
And it's like you're not going to solve the root problem of mental health with enforcement. You solve it with treatment and prevention. And the same thing about education and unemployment. There are jobs out there for people, but the jobs are hard for people to get if they've never had the education that I've been afforded. And
Right.
I've only gone to public schools. I've never gone. The only private school I went to was a Catholic preschool, and that was it. And everything else has been public.
Sure.
But I still had the advantage compared to a lot of people because I went to a suburban white elementary school and middle school. It was behind, but it was still decent compared to a lot of schools in South Georgia, a public high school. And I went to a public university on a Hope grant, which means I didn't even have any debt when I came out.
Right.
And think about that path for so many people who don't get to go to a good elementary school in the first place. They start off on a completely bad foot. And that's not even necessarily based on race, but you can definitely see racial disparity in the opportunities that a lot of people have versus what I was given.
Sure.
So, but again, going to that budget, like all we're doing is saying, it's almost like people say, well, we can't guarantee that education and mental health monies will be efficient. So it's a weird gamble for us to invest in those areas. We can guarantee the cops can go arrest those people and take them off the streets. So we take all this money and we channel it towards the symptom treatment instead of the prevention. And that's where when people say defund the police, at least from my perspective, that's what I hope they're talking about more than anything else. Let's reduce the number of police officers and that have to do anything because they're not qualified to do half the work as it is. They're not supposed to be mental health professionals on the street. And I mean, I think we need to take a look at the black market that has emerged on drugs, on this war on drugs and stuff. That's a whole other subject. But I think sometimes we've been fighting this battle on certain commerce markets. And we're seeing that change with marijuana at least, but it's like we aren't fixing this. Oxycontin ain't legal just to buy and sell, and we're not stopping the problem. In fact, it's gotten worse than it ever has.
Right.
Maybe we are attacking these problems incorrectly using badges and guns. But there's still need, like at the end of the day, you're not going to apply everything you need to do from a financial standpoint to mental health and education and stop all domestic violence, to stop all murder and sexual assault. You still need police. You can't get rid of law enforcement, but you can certainly do it different. And you can certainly
and other countries do it different.
Yeah.
So and I'm fine with American exceptionalism. I really am. There is a part of me that believes we got some things right, and that's kind of what the makeup of what we do. We got some things right. That does not mean we can't learn from others, especially when something's broken. Now, the biggest problem is getting people to admit that something's broken, and that's where we are right now. Is maybe that's starting to happen, but certainly not on a large scale. Certainly not after the literally hundreds of videos of police violence this week. And there are some that we can look at and go, may have been justified, but that's certainly not anywhere near to half. It's a small majority where you're like, maybe I can justify that police violence.
Well, the thing is I think when you put on the badge, when you take the job of a police officer, you should know that you are not walking into a fair situation. you bear a greater responsibility to to be less trigger happy than maybe you feel safe doing. Do you like in the police brutality stuff? A lot of the excuses have come back as we were told to clear the square under all circumstances. Well, you know what? That's a problem with leadership, because maybe that's not the message that needs to be said. Every interaction with a protester should should come with caveats of, hey, we want you to clear this square, but but here are the scenarios in which we'll do it. Like, it's hard for me to blame an untrained officer that's never dealt with protesters on the best way to do it. It's really up to their managers to make sure, is this the right person to have there? Like, don't just put a warm body into the position of riot control.
Right.
Make sure that these people know what is the best way to do it. Like, if you can train a guy multiple hours on how to hit a freaking target with a sniper rifle, you certainly can teach them empathy and de-escalation tactics too. And I
Well,
think
yeah.
that there's a macho culture that says we don't want to do that. And my thing is, well, how about you don't get very far in this career unless you do that?
Right.
Now the flip side to it is, I know police officers live in a employment world much different than I do. Nobody shoots at me for bad code.
Right.
No, I don't go into neighborhoods almost any time where I am at risk being there because I'm in a police car and I represent kind of a negative entity in that area. And
Right.
I'm never involved in black market businesses that protect their turf with guns. So, yes, police officers are constantly in a risk-based scenario. The problem is that what we often see is that once they have things under control, the anxiety of that risk is continues to boil over. And that's where it's like, okay, this whoever is in this position is taking it too far. And then the court systems, the police unions and the court systems are in a very effective pair for erasing accountability around the mistakes.
Right.
And that is what has ultimately caused the problems we're seeing right now, is the lack of accountability. Like, I cannot, I'm not surprised at the anger, because I was angry when Philando Castile was shot in Minneapolis. Was it 2 years ago? 3 years ago? The guy that was shot in his car next to his girlfriend. I was like,
Yeah.
how is this not boiling over? And then it just went away, and the jury didn't, like, there's all sorts of factors into it, but I'm like, if anybody in the line of employment can just say, I take no responsibility for mistakes because I'm afraid to be in the position in the first place, it's like, then the system isn't working.
Yeah. It obviously goes back farther than that. And we all have things that trigger us. And Trayvon Martin,
Yeah.
that happened 10, 15 minutes from my house. When it happened, and when I saw the direction the lawyer was going with well, first off, when the Stand Your Ground Act was passed, I was like, this is a problem.
Yeah.
But when I saw that's the direction the lawyer was going, I'm like, he's getting off. There's no way there's going to be a conviction here. And that talks to the whole legal system getting in the way, and again, leadership at the top allowing laws like that to be passed. In fact, pushing for laws like that to be passed.
I grew up 20 minutes away from where the jogger Arbery was killed. Like, that was,
Yeah.
it was a 20-minute drive from where my parents live, I think. when I look at the map. And I mean, I know the area, the neighborhood, and I can't say I was surprised by any of it.
No.
It's been a good old white boy network down there forever. The I mean, when I was in high school, the police ran their own gambling ring. So like there's no respect for the actual law, and there's always been a complete imbalance on racial along the racial lines and the economic lines along those same lines. It's been well maintained as to who has money down there. And then you get a situation like this, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm surprised it wasn't 6 months before they started up something. Like the only thing that is actually like video is the only thing that is making any of this more relevant to people.
Right.
Is that it's very hard to refute what we're seeing. But
Right.
the thing is, we've seen videos of this stuff before, and juries, like a jury system, lets folks off the hook. And I'm like, there has to be accountability for the bad apples. There just
And
has to be.
to some small degree, and I'm not a lawyer. To some small degree, the juries let them off because the laws are in place to
Yeah,
grant law enforcement a wider berth in what they can do. And
yeah,
that has to go away. Law enforcement has to be held accountable as citizens first.
yeah,
So, um, as far as all this goes, there's only so much I can do, but what I've committed to do is to learn more,
yeah,
to read more, to watch more, to engage more. There was a nice there's a nice Google Doc that two ladies put together called Justice in June, and you can hit it at bit.ly/June Justice. That gives you lots of resources to read and watch and listen to and think about. The other thing I've committed to doing is previously on Facebook, we all have family members who believe differently than we do.
yeah,
And I've not engaged in the past just because I felt it was to some degree worthless. I've given up on. I've changed my mind on that. I'm not letting family members get away with lazy arguments repeated from various conservative sources. Various straw men being built, various
yeah,
redirections being thrown up. I'm now calling people out on it. I'm done playing nice, and I'm going to engage and make them regret posting something lazy. If you want to have a thoughtful discussion on the issue and how we treat it, great, we'll have that. But
yeah,
don't be lazy with your argument.
yeah. I've probably done too good of a job of filtering out the jackasses in my life. I would say that I may have had a heated discussion with one person just to, they just gave a common rebuttal as to why racism goes both ways kind of thing. And I'm just like, until you understand how class structure works in this country, don't come at me with the one situation you saw early on, like 20 years ago, as a reason not to care about this movement. But
Right.
that was it. Like on Facebook, I have one African American friend who, um, like this one particular friend has a very, um, I don't want to call it patriotic. He's got a very single-minded view on how America is perfect and racism doesn't exist. And
Right.
I'm like, why do you keep listening to this dude and let him comment on your stuff? He's like, he just keeps everything in balance that I know that there's people like him still out there. So I just basically post back memes to the dude just to kind of get him stirred up. But that's the only like that truly I don't have almost anybody I associate with on Facebook and Twitter is a pretty much an echo chamber that I'm very confident is not an ignorant echo chamber. but it's just not. I just don't converse with enough people that spout um, narrow-minded views on what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And I've tried not to opine myself on things. I feel giving my opinion is not necessarily helpful. It's not my experience. It's
yeah.
not something I've grown up in. So I don't think I've tried to amplify. Um, is what I've tried to do over the past week, is just tried to amplify those who are affected, those who do have life experiences. They're the ones to amplify at the moment, and let them express what's going on. So that's what I've been trying to push on.
So I guess without going more into our personal opinions, what does a manager of a technical manager do in this scenario, especially a white one that you have privilege. You obviously you are not affected by a lot of the debate going on.
Right.
Uh, like, what is your role in this?
Okay, so we're back to the different issues being that we're talking about. When it comes to overuse of force by the police, I'm not sure there's a lot that can be done as a manager in a corporate role for that.
Yeah.
We're back to the racial
Well,
equality.
no,
Go ahead.
I'm thinking more about how you converse with your employees. Not to say that you need to change how
Right.
you've been doing something wrong. I'm talking much more about how do you address it? Like, and it's not
That's
as
an excellent question, because I don't think it's tough, because I'm perfectly fine on Facebook telling a relative that their argument is lazy and that they need to really understand the issue, or they need to better state their argument if they're going to come at me with something.
yeah.
As a manager to employees, you have a responsibility to I'm not to make sure all employees can speak. Um, but maybe there's those side communications of, this is not your lane, stay out of your lane for the moment.
Hmm.
um Again, it people are allowed their opinions. um when it comes to workplace harmony, that there are things that a manager has to look at when it comes to workplace harmony. But maybe, and this is what I've been arguing with allies about, is maybe harmony isn't what we need at the moment. um
Yeah, there's definitely a desire to keep things stable as a manager. I mean, that's what
right.
you're.
But that's what I'm saying. But is that the right thing?
Oh, probably that's yeah. I'm
that
agreeing
that
with
that
you.
that's where
That
I'm struggling, is I don't think it's necessarily the right thing.
well, I think one, you listen. I mean,
Right.
the last thing I want to do is to reach out to anyone I know who's African American and put the burden on them to make me feel better about the state of the world. Like, it's not on them to say, "Hey, Randy, I know you don't feel this way. Don't worry about it." Like, that's not what. Like, the only thing that I have said to people is, "How are you doing?
Right.
Can I help in any way?" But I also don't expect them to give me that outlet. Like, it's not up to them to make me feel better at all. Because I feel
Right.
bad about the state of the world. I feel bad about the state of things. But it's not their job. Like, the burden is way more on them to live in it.
Right.
It's not their job or their responsibility to make me feel good about it. And it's not their job to solve the problem. I mean, it really, to me, it starts at the very top of the chain, which is the white people of America, to really. enact the change. The people in power, the people at the top of the game, have to change how the game is played.
Right.
And so I think when you're in a leadership position, and if you have someone who is of a minority status, it is up to you to listen to what they have to say, but also to relieve them of any burden to be the representative of all of it to you.
And maybe that's the manager's job, is to get out there and educate the workforce on here are some thoughts on how to approach this issue here, and everybody take it into it and take out of it what you're going to, but here are some resources for you to look at. And you can give your opinion by giving the right resources, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah. And I mean, I do think communication is key. Whatever you do, don't try to joke around and be funny about stuff. Like, I feel like I see a lot of people that want to make jokes or to liven the mood. And it's like, I know you want stability and things to get back to normal, but if you're not a professional comedian, there's very little you can say that is worth laughing at about
Right.
these things.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, I hear a lot of these triggered white guys go, but I can't say anything. There's nothing I can say. Everything I say is wrong. And I'm like, yes, you're right. Like, they're complaining about how unfair it is. I'm like, it is nowhere near as unfair as how all this works in real life.
Right.
Your inability to say the right thing in these circumstances, to get easily canceled or whatever, is as bad as it gets for you. So just keep your mouth shut unless
Right.
you really know what you're saying is going to be helpful, and
Right.
be supportive, but don't feel the need for your opinion to matter as much unless you're doing something that will enact change. And, like, in a way, I'm just saying maybe your biggest job is to absorb the angst of people, to take that brunt of, hey, you did not cause racism, but you may perpetuate it by saying the wrong thing. So it's on you to either say the right thing or to shut up more than you
Right.
probably are used to. And that's maybe as good as it gets for you, but it's not that bad. That's the
Right.
thing. It's just, if you have to shut up a little bit more, and that's all the side effect of this is, you just don't have much to complain about.
It's probably a benefit to society that you stop talking and start listening a little more.
Yeah.
So
And don't feel like you have to have every solution to the problem. I mean, I know that's the manager's role, is to provide solutions, get things fixed, keep things stable. But is a bigger problem than all of us, or than each. There's no one person that's going to solve all this. Even the people in the Oval Office, they can't solve it all themselves. They certainly can do a lot more than I can to quit perpetuating it,
right.
but it's not all on them either. It's on a collective group of people to recognize that things haven't changed since the 60s and 70s that we thought had. And we need to continue to do more. But we don't get there by pushing back on the argument as it comes to us. Like, the argument's being delivered in a certain way. And and right now the tagline is Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean excluding out other groups of concern. It means that this is what the moral of this argument is.
Right.
You do not have to justify the all lives matter or the blue lives matter to combat it. It's
Right.
not a dirty word just to say Black Lives, or a dirty phrase to say Black Lives Matter. I think the best comparison is that we don't celebrate 9/11 by saying all buildings matter.
Right.
We don't combat violence like school shootings by saying, Well, not just elementary schools, but colleges too. Like, nobody would come back at a stop school shootings and say, well, post offices are important as well. Like, nobody would freaking say that.
Right.
But people feel this need to fight back on the BLM movement because they feel excluded by it.
And maybe they're uncomfortable and feeling a little guilty and trying to feel better. Who knows?
Yeah. And feeling that guilt is something that people have to come to terms with, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I like I said at the beginning of this, people ask me how I'm doing, and I'm like, I am fortunate as hell. Like, there's no other way to say it. Do I feel guilty about it? Yeah. Like, I don't face half the issues that people in this country do. Have I made decisions that have reinforced it? Yes. Did I build up from the ground up? Like the literal, like I had no supporting cast to help me get here? Hell no, I had tons. And a system that was balanced in my favor. Always is. I always walk into any room as a white male and I've got an advantage over any other classification.
Right.
And do I exploit it? I try not to. I don't actively do anything to do that. But I also know if I just act like myself and act like a normal person, I am 90% there. And recognizing that is part of, like, maybe guilt comes along with it, but overreacting to that guilt is also part of the problem that I see with a lot of people, especially white men.
Right.
And as a manager, you have to recognize that too. With any other classification, any person in any other class that you interact with, understanding that, and in a way recognizing it to them. Because the other thing that I'll say about people interacting with anyone that a white male, it's because people are getting educated. People don't know where you stand all the time. And it may be up to people to vocalize what they're willing to support, and that they understand that they have privilege.
Right.
I made it a big point to my students to say, like, hey, I recognize this. I'm going to give you advice. It may not be as easy for you to implement it. I said that to women developers a number of times. I will not ignore the fact that this is a white male-driven world in the United States. And I didn't want people to applaud me for saying that. I wanted to make sure that people knew nothing that I was recommending to them was just like some easy piece of cake advice all the time.
Right.
And I think that's another responsibility of managers in this type of scenario, to understand that, hey, everything that worked for you may not work the same for everyone you give the advice to. And how you deal with this how I deal with the white male guilt scenario is still easier than dealing with the actual disparity of racial inequality.
For sure.
And it's up to you at the top to handle that well, to handle it better, and not get angry over it. Okay, that's all I got, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
But it's loaded. It's all loaded conversation.
It is, and it's a case of it's not something you're going to solve or even be stuck in your opinions on immediately.
Yeah.
It's something to sit and work through, and know that all your employees are doing the same.
Yep. So what are you working on the? I know we're going to talk about this on this old app one day, but you said you're working on a Vue app. Quickly describe what you're doing.
Yeah, it's quickly just it's a quiz app. So for officiating, really. So for football officiating, in the off season, college officials get all sorts of tests to work through to work through play scenarios,
Mm-hmm.
and they're all on paper and they're PDFs and they're hard to take with you. So I want something that if I'm standing in line somewhere on a phone, I can just pull up an app and just work through a couple of play situations and hit them a few times until I get them right.
Yeah.
And if I just do that over and over and over again, I'll be better at it. But it's actually come a long way in about a week and a half time. It's fully workable right now to where there's a question, there's three answer choices. It lights up red or green depending on whether you got it right or wrong. It shows the answer, it moves on to the next question, so on and so forth. So the next step's going to be to log in to track your progress, and that at that point that'll be version 1.0.
So you're a CTO, and
Yep.
and I've given you plenty of hell about being a CTO trying to code, but do you find yourself when you're working on the tech, trying to get into Vue and learn Vue and build this tool, when you're interrupted by non-technical problems, whether it's family, job, whatever, are you more frustrated with those other problems trying to invade your technical concentration?
At times, I also know that my attention span is not what it's been in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So when I've been working on this, I can probably only go a couple hours at a time before my attention goes somewhere else, and I can't concentrate on the problem I'm trying to solve.
Yep.
So it's essentially down to trying to make one thing work at a time. If I make that one thing work, I go away and I do something else, and I come back to it the next day or so to try and make the next thing work.
Interesting. Yeah, it's people have been asking me lately about, because I'm in this role of almost 100% management and communications versus any kind of architecture and coding. And they're like, so would you want to do the coding again? And I feel like only if I get back to 50-50. Like I feel like this 80-20, 70-30, like 70% management, 80% management, and 20%. It's almost like it's a waste of time for me to be coding that small chunk.
You certainly, my deep understanding of Vue and Netlify and Vuetify and all the different tools I'm using is not deep. It is, how do I make this work? Where's the Google link that'll show me how to make this work? You ask me how Vue works. I can probably explain it to you to some degree. But a deep understanding is not really possible. And if related, we've talked about building a couple tools within the Microsoft ecosystem for construction specialties. One of my dispatchers came back to me last week, said this tool's not quite working. So I had to dive in. I had to spend a little bit of time to reacquaint myself with what was going on, only to discover it wasn't really the problem of the tool. It was really on her end. But it was a case of, I don't remember how this works. Now I got to go back through it again.
Yeah.
Which is part of what you were saying when you're like, is this really something you want to do, or should somebody else do it?
Yeah.
But I was able to make it.
Cool. All right. That's an episode.
Yep. And this conversation won't stop.
No, it won't.
That's important.
Yeah, it doesn't end today. Not at all. But it ends right now for the podcast.
Yep. Today. All right. We will, I'll talk to you soon then.
Good man. Later.
Thanks for listening to the CTO Think podcast. Show notes and previous episodes can be found on our website at ctothink.com. Reviews on Apple iTunes are always appreciated and help promote the show. Patreon contributions help us to produce episode transcripts, which allow people that are deaf or hard of hearing to access the show. If you have feedback, ideas, or want to be a guest, please email us at hello@ctothink.com. Show music is Dumpster Dive by Mark Wallach, licensed by premiumbeat.com. Voiceover work by meganvoices.com. You'll hear from us next week.